Welcome to Front Office Pros. Today, we're going to be going through some Week 9 trade targets.
Hike!
All right, Joe. So, per usual, we're going to go with two each. So, who's the first guy that you got your eye on?
Yeah, I'm going to go with quarterback Dak Prescott of the Dallas Cowboys. And, this is kind of a repeat from last year. Dak had a pretty subpar first half of the season. Fantasy, owners were concerned about him. But then the schedule really opened up in the second half of the year. And him and CeeDee Lamb really won people a lot of fantasy championships last year. And I think he's kind of sizing up for that similar potential output this year with his second half schedule. He just faced the 49ers, but this week he's got Atlanta, then he goes to Philly, Houston, Washington, Giants, but then really for the playoff stretch, weeks 15 through 17 for most people, he's got the Carolina Panthers, Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and then Philadelphia Eagles for your championship week. And you talk about like a potential, fantasy championship winning 3 weeks. I mean, it's hard to get better than that from your quarterback perspective. And even though he's had some stinkers and he's kind of been up and down this year, I do think he's got potential to, still finish strong for you. And I'm also talking from the standpoint of a Dak Prescott owner. So I know I've been a part of those ebbs and flows, but, it's according to his trade value chart. We got him at 22 value, which is right in the middle of the pack. It's kind of on the lower side, but some of the guys around him, I mean, I do think potentially, you could trade guys like Joe Burrow, maybe even a Brock Purdy. And I think with this fantasy schedule, and you saw CeeDee Lamb have the big game against the 49ers, I don't think there's a question that he could potentially, outdo those guys the rest of the way.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, with the Jordan Love possible injury as well, he's in that area. Don't know if you could acquire that for Dak. And I do think the one thing going for him, although he's not a guy I would necessarily target, I do think the one thing going for him is sometimes, and I think this falsely happens. I don't think that as fantasy owners, I don't think you should be concerned about this, but sometimes when they see a team not doing very well, as a result, you kind of have your outlook on that team is worse. So
Right.
even though Dak has done okay, CD has not been as great. Just because the Cowboys are kind of spiraling, it kind of makes them tainted in a way. And I don't think you should look at it that way. You got to kind of separate yourself from the fact that, now, mind you, if there are stuff that's happening to the Cowboys in real life that would affect their fantasy output, you obviously have to take into consideration. I don't think we're there yet.
Yeah, I don't think so either. And I mean, yeah, it's been a rough start, but last year they're in a similar boat. I mean, you could argue that their run game and offensive line were better last year, which could hurt them a little bit. But fact of the matter is, it's still Dak, still got CeeDee Lamb. Turpin's been pretty good. They got Tolbert, so they have some other options. Brandon Cooks, should come back eventually and probably, hopefully, stabilize that offense a little bit as well.
Well, and he has no run game. I think this might be the worst run game he's ever had in his career in Dallas.
Yeah, even though last year wasn't the greatest. I mean, Pollard did start to come on in the second half of last year as well, but this is pretty rough.
This is very lackluster.
Well, but Jerry just couldn't afford Derrick Henry, and he didn't think he was going to fit in the offense. So
That's a bunch of baloney. I can't. I think he's just come out and said I made a mistake. He just looks like a fool.
yeah, I mean, he should have just came out and said, "Yeah, we made a mistake," but you know what? So did other teams. Only one team got Derrick Henry, so it is what it is.
Yeah, exactly. So my first trade target is going to be wide receiver Calvin Ridley of Tennessee Titans. We just talked about him recently, Joe, on our Dynasty Fallout video based on the DeAndre Hopkins trade. Now, I thought that he could do better. I didn't know if he would do this good. It was a juicy matchup at Detroit, but at his best game of the year, 15 targets, 10 catches for 143 yards, no touchdowns. That was with Mason Rudolph as the quarterback. Don't know, whenever Will Levis comes back. But, you talk about a schedule. I mean, he's got a pretty nice schedule himself. He's got Minnesota coming up, at Washington, Jacksonville twice, Indianapolis, Cincinnati doesn't scare me, New England next week. So he's got some decent matchups. And if he's getting that high a target share, he's not really competing really with anybody. So whether it's Levis or Rudolph, I don't think it much matters. Now that Hopkins is gone, which I know you didn't think, Joe, that would even have much of an impact, but it really did show that it did.
Yeah, it's crazy that essentially it looks like Hopkins was holding up targets for Ridley, even though Hopkins wasn't even doing that well himself there in Tennessee or, really garnering that many targets. I mean, Ridley had, the 8 target game, which he felt like was really 0, but technically he did have 8 targets in that game. And then kind of was, lackluster since then. But yeah, the first game without DeAndre Hopkins, they, really hyper targeted him, really made it a point to get him the ball. And if they continue to do that, his value is pretty low here on the trade chart.
Well, the past 3 weeks, he's been getting targeted more and more. 9 targets the week before that, 8 targets with like no catches. And that's where he famously came out and said, I was targeted. It didn't even seem like it. So, and like you referred to, based on the Draft Sharks trade value chart here, I mean, his value has not changed much. I would much rather have him over a guy like Jackson Smith and Jake, but I like JSN. Doesn't get enough volume, though. I think Ridley gets much more volume, especially when DK comes back. Rather have him over Lad McConkey, T. Higgins, DeAndre Hopkins, Tank Dell. I don't know. With Stephon Diggs going off for the year, we saw what Tank Dell was able to do in his rookie year. So he was like going on pace to be a league winner. So I'm not sure about that one as much, but all those other guys, I have no issue trading them away to get Calvin Ridley. Or, hey, if you want to trade running back, maybe you trade a guy like Travis Etienne, or Ramondre Stevenson. That could be interesting too, straight up for Calvin Ridley.
Yeah, no, I mean, those are interesting options to go ahead and get him. I mean, as far as Tank Dell goes, I mean, he really doesn't look fully healthy. So I think that's the tough thing. And, we were all expecting him to get back to last season form. Just hasn't shown that, yet.
Are you enjoying this episode so far? Well, if you are, subscribe to our YouTube channel, smash that like button, and hit the notification bell for upcoming videos. We do videos throughout the year, so you're not going to want to miss what we have in store. All right, Joe, so going to your next trade target, who you had to steal from me. So who was that?
Yeah, for once we both had, picked a similar, the same guy. Usually that doesn't happen, but here we are. And talking about the Houston Texans, we're going to stay there and talk about wide receiver Nico Collins. And yeah, I get that this is potentially a buy high, but if the owner of Nico Collins happens to, kind of be on the outs and not looking for that playoff spot, I think there is a chance you can go ahead and buy him. If they want to make a late playoff push, maybe they need somebody that can help them now instead of waiting for Nico Collins to return in a couple of weeks, which it looks like he's on pace to return when he is eligible in week 10. And, you mentioned Stephon Diggs out for the year now. Tank Dell's not really looking like himself. Nico Collins should just, go right back to stepping into that wide receiver one on this Houston Texans offense. And honestly, they need Nico Collins. Even when they had, Stephon Diggs, I mean, Collins has really made that Houston Texans offense work and move forward. I mean, CJ Stroud isn't looking CJ Stroud without him. So they really need Nico to come back. And I think when he does, he's, still going to be that wide receiver one for you moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, he was a guy who I was eyeing as well. I ended up giving him to you. But I think for me, one of the reasons why I considered him was, we didn't talk about it. I think we were all really surprised when Puka Nacua became activated and played. They just activated his 21-week window, and then all of a sudden, 21-day window. What am I talking about? 21-day window, and all of a sudden,
21 weeks would be rough.
Yeah, it would be. But he was activated, and all of a sudden he started playing. We're like, what? Like, I thought we were going to be a few weeks, and then you saw the immediate impact he had. So it was one of those ones that was like, man, you should have traded him for him sooner. But so hard to know when he was going to be healthy and he was going to be right. So even though, yes, I do think it could be a buy high situation, depending on who the Nico Collins owner is in your league, they might be in the dire situation where they say, hey, I need help now. I can't wait for Nico Collins to be ready. And even though if he gets activated next week, it doesn't mean that he's going to go right back to 100% of the snaps. And it is risky still. It's a hamstring injury. So I think there's some risk involved with him that could make the deal happen. Based on the trade value chart, who would you be looking to trade away to acquire him?
Yeah, I mean, looking at some of the guys around him, I mean, I think Drake London would make a lot of sense. Malik Neighbors, it might be tough. I mean, Puka might also be interesting off of that, game coming back. If you want to go ahead and try to sell him high off of that one game, just because I don't think he's out of the woods with himself being injured, but maybe the Nico Collins owner wouldn't necessarily be comfortable, trading with another injury-prone guy. That's also the same case you could kind of make for Deebo Samuel as well. But I do think he is somebody you could potentially trade. Just even though without Brandon Ayuk, I mean, he should also be the wide receiver one, but his injury risk, I think, if I could, get Nico Collins, because Debo's just been dealing with a bunch of injuries. I mean, not only has he been sick with pneumonia, now he's, played in the game, popped up with the rib injury. Christian McCaffrey's also going to be coming back, and I think he's going to take away some of the receiving work. And, George Kittle's been absolutely a force in the tight end position. So it's not guaranteed that all the targets are going to go to Debo and all that. If he doesn't hit that big play, he's going to kind of be disappointing where Nico Collins is just going to eat up those targets in Houston.
Not to mention with Deebo Samuel, I mean, he was already having problems with pneumonia. Now he's got a rib injury, which could affect his breathing, right? I mean, that's your lungs right there.
Well, the pneumonia already has been. I mean, that's why he was playing sparingly.
No, I know, but with a rib injury on top of it, depending on, they protecting the lungs. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah, 100%. Yeah, it's not a very good situation.
No, not at all. So my final trade target is going to be a guy who hasn't had that good of a year so far. Was dominant last year. It might be an opportunity to go scoop him up. That's tight end Evan Engram of Jacksonville Jaguars. He was injured there for roughly 1, 2, 3, 4 weeks, and these past 3 weeks he's actually looked pretty good. 10 targets, 10 catches, 102 yards. 3 weeks ago, 5 targets, 5 catches, 35 yards. In this most recent week, 5 targets, 4 catches, 36 yards, and a touchdown. I think when you think about the tight end landscape, it's pretty dire. Maybe it's getting a little better of late. There's a couple of guys like Tucker Kraft, Kate Houghton, guys like that have come out of the woodwork who've turned out to be pretty good. But when you think about Evan Engram, he was targeted so much last year, and he was one of Trevor Lawrence's favorite targets. And now with Christian Kirk hurting his collarbone, him out for the year, Brian Thomas also shaken up. Might be hard to go get this guy. Might be somewhat of a buy high as far as his opportunity, right? Because there is a opportunity cost, right? To say like, okay, what is this guy going to possibly do? He hasn't really torn it up on the stat sheet, but if you're an Evan Engram owner, I feel like if you're at least following the league cycle here, you got to be pretty excited. So I would definitely be interested. I would be willing to trade guys like David Njoku for him. I think I would be willing to trade also a guy like Jake Ferguson, maybe Dalton Kincaid. He's still maybe got name recognition. Even possibly Trey McBride. I think you could probably get plus. I think you could do Trey McBride for Evan Engram plus. I don't think you just have that would definitely not be a 1-to-1 deal. And being a tight end is not that valued. I mean, you could even trade a guy, like we talked earlier, like a JSN, or maybe you trade a guy like Ramondre Stevenson or J.K. Dobbins, somebody like that who maybe you don't really need. I think it could be interesting.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think this is the perfect week to bring up Evan Engram because, like you mentioned, like he hasn't exactly exploded onto the scene yet this season, and had that big game. But I think this is potentially the week, especially if Brian Thomas Jr. doesn't play, which the reporting on that has kind of been all over the place, from day to day to missing 2 to 4 weeks. Not really sure what to believe moving forward, but if he doesn't play, Evan Engram should absolutely smash this week, and because he's going to be the most reliable target for Trevor Lawrence, and I just see him getting absolutely peppered with targets. So I think this is really, your one opportunity to get him at a lower cost, because I think next week it's going to go, his price is going to go up exponentially.
So that does it for this episode. We talked about a few trade targets that you should reach out to your league, see if you can acquire them. And we did some other trade targets as well. If you want to check those out, go ahead and tune in. Thank you so much for tuning in, and until next time.